Hi, and welcome back to Misty Mountain Gaming. I'm the Thedndwannabe. My name is Rob. And if you haven't figured this out yet, I run Dungeons & Dragons. And while I have occasionally run games and campaigns in famous, official, published Dungeons & Dragons settings, I prefer to run in my own personal homebrew setting, Arelay. That's because I love being an expert on the world that my players are adventuring in. I don't want them to ask me a question and me not have an answer, let alone the right answer. And there's a lot to remember about a world, even for a dungeon master. Mountain ranges, rivers, nations, kingdoms, countries, shops, and taverns, all of these things have names, and the NPCs and the players' characters who populate the world, who live their fictional lives there, ought to know them. But while I'm an expert on my world, my players aren't. And even me, the expert, has trouble keeping up with all of this sometimes. Maybe the reason we can't remember the names of these places is because the names of these places aren't memorable. So, what can we do? How can we help get our players invested in the map, to remember the names of the things we create? How can we make locations stand out against all the others, not only to our players, but to us as dungeon masters as well? Today, we're going to answer those questions, and we're going to illustrate them by using other examples in fiction and places in the real world. Are you ready? Let's begin. When you're trying to give a location a memorable name, it's best to associate it with something that's familiar to the players, something that they understand, something that, when it's brought up, instantly brings this place and something about it to mind. Describing and naming a place in the same breath will help solidify the location in the fiction and in the minds of the people around the table. Start by naming a place after its memorable physical features. An example from my own world is the Flying Isles, and the Burning Isles, and the Ember Isles. Same place, those three. Lots has happened there. Other examples are the Blight, or Shallowford, or Shady Vale. All places described by what you see when you get there. Examples in popular fiction of this extremely effective trope are Metropolis, a big honkin' city; the Black Gate, where a big black gate is; the Misty Mountains, a range of mountains that are misty; and the Lonely Mountain, the mountain with nothing else around it. We do this in the real world as well, naming places Little Rock and Salt Lake City, or the Dead Sea. You can also kind of take the opposite approach and name things ironically, like naming a frigid tundra Greenland, or a verdant island Iceland, or a chilly northern city Neverwinter. You can also try naming things after their geographic placement on the map. This has been by far the most successful tactic at my table. North Shore, a long, narrow country following the northern seaboard of the main continent. South March, a enormous plain on the south of the continent. Or Sintra, a big honkin' city in the middle of everything, are very memorable to not only me, but to my players as well. Other examples of this include Westeros, or North and South Carolina, or Virginia and West Virginia, or the Middle East, or the East Indies, all described by their relative position on the map. Detailing places by their personality also works. Take, for example, Port Providence, a very successful mercantile harbor, or Bleak Haven, a single dot of safety within an otherwise very dangerous land. Or the Savage Wilds, an untamable wilderness beyond civilization. Naming places in this way kind of gives you a clear impression of what you're in for if you were to go to one of these places just by what's on the tin. Other examples include the aspirationally named Philadelphia, the city of brotherly love, or Sleepy Hollow. You can also always name things after the local flora and fauna. Triplet Pines, Misty Oaks, Beaver Dam, and the Iron Mountains give you an immediate sense of what's around these locations when you think of them. Though Ravenloft got its name for other reasons, it's still a great name for a place where you can find a lot of ravens. Elm Street probably has a lot of elms on that street, nightmares notwithstanding. And Hartford probably got its name for a low point in the river where deer used to cross. Hart's an old-timey word for deer, by the way. And if there's a distinct racial or bestial bias in an area, you can always name the location after its inhabitants. Not so common in the real world because we're all humans here, but it has a lot of precedence in fiction. Take Hobbiton, Alfheim, the Dwarfholds of the North, or Dragonspire Peak as examples. Another route to take when trying to create memorable location names is, rather than describing the place, weaving it into the lore and history of your world. Associate places with historic events, or prominent figures, or elements of regional culture or religion. Try naming places after significant things that happened there in their history. For example, Stone's Throw is a name for a human settlement in my setting that is so close to the mountains where stone giants used to live that the giants would huck enormous boulders at their little twiggy wooden town. So, the people that lived there took those boulders, shaped them, and built a stronger, hardier fortress for themselves, and named it Stone's Throw. Heart's End is a location in Blackreach, named because when Rodbert Donmanar, the local lord, was hunting the white stag, he shot it and chased it for days as it fled him, eventually expiring at the location where Rodbert set up shop, naming the town after the titular Heart's End. Other examples are King's Landing, where once the king landed, or Oxford, where oxen would ford the river, or maybe New York, because Old York just wasn't doing it for you anymore. Better yet, name places after gods or nobility or heroes significant in the region. For example, Dame Hythe is named after the god Damus in my setting. It's a big port city that honors him and values the things that he values. And we do this all the time in the real world. Alexandria, Constantinople, Virginia, Maryland, Raleigh, Lincoln, Jacksonville, Washington, D.C., Columbus. We are constantly honoring people that are important to the region and important at the time in the way that we name places. I love, love, love this approach because it adds to your world building. When your players think about the names of these locations, they'll also be remembering other aspects of your culture, of your history, and of the setting. Also, it makes your characters care about the lore. If they're from a place that was named after a guy, they probably care about that guy, at least a little bit. And it could be positive or negative. I mean, I'm sure not everybody that lives in Jacksonville was wild about Andrew Jackson. If, after exhausting these tips, you're still struggling to find that perfect name for some place in your setting, I can't recommend a thesaurus strongly enough. Take a word that either describes the place or has something to do with its history, and find its synonyms. Learn a new word, especially one that sounds archaic and sophisticated, and use that word in its place. Maybe that will help. Finally, my last tip, if your players are struggling to remember the names of locations in your world, let them name stuff. In my setting, the Sabine Desert, the town of Bleakwatch, and the Dogwood Blossom Inn were all named by players. And players are way less likely to forget something that they came up with. That's it, guys. That's the video. Tips for naming things in your world in such a way that they will be on the tip of your tongue and in the forefront of your players' minds during roleplay. Working title. Eschewing the random associations of letters and syllables that look and sound fantasy-y in favor of tangible, relatable location names will pay off big dividends for you in the future. But what are some of the most successful tactics you've encountered or come up with to help people in your group remember bits of your world? What has and hasn't worked for you? I look forward to reading all about it in the comments below. I'll see you guys next week for another video much like this one. Make sure you subscribe and ring the bell so that you don't miss it. Also, remember I'm on Twitch now, so if you want to hang out with me live while I play some games or ride an adventure or just want to have a conversation, make sure you go to Misty Mountain Streaming and give us a follow so you'll know when I'm live. Until next time, friends and adventurers, farewell and Godspeed. But what are some of your most successful tips that you've